Hello and welcome to Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. And today I'm at the Heaven Hill Distillery in Louisville, Kentucky. And the Heaven Hill Distillery is a special distillery because it's not owned by a big company, but it's privately owned by a family, and they are really dedicated to making a good bourbon. And what else is special about Heaven Hill is they produce a wheat whiskey. And wheat whiskey is very difficult to produce, and I think that it took them a long time to master the wheat whiskey. But if you've tasted their product, then you realize the wheat whiskey is pretty good. Also, Heaven Hill has a lot of old whiskies, like the Elijah Craig. You have a 12-year-old, you have an 18-year-old, and you have I think a 23-year-old, and that is very uncommon for bourbon whiskies, but it is very good. So let's find out what's behind Heaven Hill. We're in the mill room, where the grain is ground down into a powder that is then brought into the mash tub. Behind me, we have the rye mill. In this conveyor at the top, we have the grain entering, then it's being hammered down into a coarse grist, and over these conveyors, they're transported into the mash tub in the other room. The rye mill is also used for the wheat when they produce wheat whiskey. The next mill here is the malt mill, where the malted barley is being hammered down, and that is very important because of the enzymes in the next step. The one on the far left is the corn mill that hammers down the corn, and that is the main ingredient for the bourbon, so this is kind of the most important. I'm standing right at the mash tub, and here's where all the corn and the grain and the malt comes in. We have corn, grain, and malt coming into the mash tub. It gets soaked in with water, and the enzymes within the malt turn the starch of all the grain into sugar that is later being fermented into alcohol. The very special thing about Heaven Hill is that they do a wheat whiskey. Means you also have wheat in it, and making a wheat whiskey is pretty difficult because you can do a lot of things wrong. But if you have ever tried their product, it is pretty good. So Heaven Hill mastered the wheat whiskey. Right next to the mash tubs are the silos for the grain and the corn. We have 3 for corn, 2 for malted barley and rye, and 1 for wheat. So here we see that the main product is bourbon, and you also have the wheat whiskey.
This is the yeast tub, where the yeast is grown to be used in the fermentation.
After the mash has been produced, we add the yeast, and then it comes to the fermentation, where the alcohol is produced from the sugar that has been broken down by the enzymes. And that takes a couple of days, and after these days you have to try if the beer is now good, or if you had any problems with vinegar bacteria or stuff. But if you have a controlled process, it's usually not bad, but quality control is always a good thing for a good product.
The Americans are very pragmatic, so every pipe is clearly labeled, direction and content, and you can also see what flows through that pipe. And here now we are in the still room, and we see 2 stills, still number 1 and still number 2. They reach from the ground floor to the very top of the building, and that is 3 to 4 stories tall. And although you see a lot of stainless steel here, the Inside of the still is copper, so you have the catalytic reactions to get a good whiskey out of the stills. This here are now the tail houses, as the Americans call it. They're just regular spirit safes where you can sample the whiskey. As you can see, the locks are open, so the federals are a bit more easy now because the taxes are not cheated anymore. And now I will have a taste of what is the new spirit of Heaven Hill. And what we see right here is the doubler. After the first distillation, the liquid is distilled again to improve the whiskey even a second time. And here we see the lower end of the doubler, and the motors in front of the stills are actually valves to empty them.
Okay, here I'm standing next to the chillers or the heat exchangers, and this is where the hot alcoholic fumes are turned into the raw whiskey that is being shipped to the warehouses and filled into the fresh white oak barrels for maturation.
The whiskey doesn't run through these pipes. These pipes are actually filled with process water, and this process water is used to condense the alcoholic fumes back into the distilled spirits. And you have to cool down this process waters, and this is done in these pipes. The actual condenser sits at the top of the column still, and he produces the raw whiskey from the alcoholic fumes. All of the whiskey from Heaven Hill is distilled within Louisville. Afterwards, it is filled into these trailers and hauled off to Bardstown, where most of the warehouses of Heaven Hills lie. The warehouses in Bardstown are partially open to public, so you can book a tour, and then in the end of the tour you can even taste the products. The warehouses of Heaven Hills are 4 stories tall, and every story has a rack with 3 barrels stacked high. Every barrel has a number 3 jar with the lids charred with the number 1 jar. There are no leak hunters anymore. If you have a cask that leaks or a barrel that leaks, then the whiskey just runs out and Heaven Hill loses some of its precious juice. Also, there is no warehouse rotation anymore, so if you want a very good whiskey, you have to store it in the sweet spot of the warehouses. And now we come to the end of the path, and we turn around, then we see the Avon Williams whiskey, and that is the premium brand of Heaven Hill. In the middle of every warehouse, you will find a pendulum that shows you how crooked the building is. This is very important when you load the warehouse, because if you load the warehouse only on one side, it might fall over and crash and you will lose all the whiskey. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, then please give me a thumbs up or share this video on any social media.